Welcome to the 31st episode of Arbiter of Worlds. If you're a returning subscriber, thanks for supporting the channel. If you're new to the channel, hello. Here at Arbiter of Worlds, we study the art and science of running and creating tabletop role-playing games. This episode is coming at a special moment for me, because in just a few hours, I'll be launching my crowdfunding campaign for the Adventurer Conqueror King System Imperial Imprint, or ACKS II. In fact, the Kickstarter might be live by the time you watch this. If you enjoy my videos and are an enthusiast for sandbox games, simulation, and player agency, I hope you'll head over to the Kickstarter page and pledge for your copy of ACKS II. The link is in the description below. Last week, we introduced the concept of diegesis in tabletop gaming. Today, we're going to return to the topic of diegesis in the context of player agency. As a refresher, agency is the capacity for human beings to make choices and to impose those choices on the world. In an RPG context, player agency is the capacity for players to make choices and impose those choices by means of their characters in the game world. Now, it's my belief that in our everyday lives, our real lives, most humans in modern society want agency, but experience an absence of it. In 2023, much of our opportunity for meaningful choice turns out to be illusory. Our daily lives are mostly routine, and our scope of choice is limited by lack of opportunity or resources. Very few people really can impose their will on the world, even in a small way. And that creates an emotional void. The agency theory of fun holds that the essence of a tabletop role-playing game is providing the experience of agency to the players. Now, when I say that agency is the essence of RPGs, I'm using essence in its Aristotelian sense as the descriptor of what makes a thing the thing it is. Something's essence is that which is unique and singular to it. For instance, the essence of Homo sapiens is reason. No other animal is as endowed with intelligence as our species. The essence of novels is long-form narrative that enables us to get inside the heads of characters. No other medium can do that the way novels can. The essence of movies is cinematic spectacle that enables us to see and hear sights and sounds that awe, frighten, inspire, or shock us. No other medium can do what movies do as well as movies can. So when I assert that agency is the essence of tabletop RPGs, I'm asserting that no other medium of entertainment can provide agency as effectively. Agency is the killer app of the tabletop RPG. Because in an RPG, by making choice X, you can impose result Y, and that's the essence of agency. And because tabletop RPGs are an experience that you share with a meaningful social circle of your friends, that result Y becomes meaningful to our lives. Few other hobbies can do that except a tiny handful of MMOs like EVE. And even there, the agency is heavily constrained by the limits of the video game in a way that it's not in a tabletop RPG. However, despite being the essence of the tabletop RPG, agency is frequently ignored by tabletop RPG designers and game masters. In order to experience agency, the players must be able to make real, not fake, choices that have meaningful consequences on the players and their world. And that, in turn, requires that the game world has an objective existence that can be manipulated by diegetic activity through the mechanism of the rules. And that, in turn, requires a measure of respect for the diegesis. It requires simulationism, which is anathema to many designers and GMs these days. Let me give an example. Imagine that we're playing a game of Call of Cthulhu set in 1933. Sneaking through the restricted vaults of the Miskatonic University Library, one of the player characters has just discovered an ancient grimoire that would greatly assist his party in battling the minions of the Great Old Ones. To make use of the grimoire, however, the PC will need to smuggle it out of the library, which is heavily guarded. So now the player is faced with a choice. Does he have his character attempt to steal the grimoire in order to improve his party's chances in their upcoming fight against evil? If he successfully steals the grimoire, then his party has a good chance of winning the fight. If he decides not to steal the grimoire, then his party has even odds of winning the fight. If he gets caught trying to steal the grimoire, then he'll be arrested and not able to help his party, which will have poor odds of winning its fight. So this is a real choice with real consequences. It's not a railroad where he has to steal the grimoire, nor is it a theme park where the party gets to win even if they lose the fight. Now let's imagine that the player decides that he'll stuff the grimoire under his shirt, cautiously move to the unrestricted area of the library, pick up a number of other books to disguise his excess bulk, and then exit the library, checking out the unimportant books while concealing the grimoire. Good plan. But the GM says, sadly, the grimoire has an RFID chip that you didn't spot, and as you exit the library, the RFID chip wirelessly activates the alarm system. A security guard comes charging at you, so we're going to need to run combat. And the player goes, what? How the... Is there an RFID chip wirelessly connected to an alarm system in the year 1933? That makes no sense whatsoever. And if there is a chip, why didn't my character see it when he flipped open the book? And the game master responds, well, your character's from 1933. He doesn't know about RFID chips, so he had no way of knowing it. At this point, the player hurls Mountain Dew in fierce invective against the GM. And you know, the player is right to be angry here, because the player's suspension of disbelief has been shattered. His noetic appreciation of the verisimilitude of the world of Cthulhu has been ruined. It is a failure of simulation. There were no RFID chips or wireless alarms in 1933. There is no justification offered for why that expectation is subverted, and the game master has therefore failed to accurately simulate the diegetic world of H.P. Lovecraft stories. And by doing so, he has taken away the player's agency. The player made reasonable choices within a range of possible outcomes, and the GM has unreasonably deprived him of those outcomes. This is bad game mastering. Now, this should not be understood to mean that any type of subversion of a player's beliefs about the game world obliterates player agency. That's not the case at all. In fact, part of exploring a game world is discovering new truths, and often that means being surprised by what you discover. But to sustain agency, that subversion of belief, that surprise, needs to increase rather than decrease the verisimilitude of the world. Let's imagine we're back in the library with the player character in his grimoire. This time, there's no RFID chip, no wireless alarm. However, as the player character approaches the library exit with his stolen grimoire, the grimoire begins to bleed. Its cover, made of desiccated human flesh, erupts in bleeding sores when it touches the body of our hero. The PC's shirt starts to soak with red blood. This presents the PC with a new choice. Does he drop the grimoire and abandon his plan? Does he try to get a large codex to cover up the bloodstain and proceed as planned? Does he feign a medical emergency to escape with his stolen book? All good stuff. Now, what differentiates these two scenarios? Well, an RFID chip is implausible in the world of 1930s Cthulhu tales. An evil grimoire that bleeds when it contacts human flesh is not. One fails as a noetic simulation, and the other succeeds. Now, one might say, well, actually, the difference is that in the first scenario, the PC couldn't do anything about it and got forced into combat automatically, while in the second scenario, the PC still had choices he could make. Okay, that's a good point. So let's change the scenario a bit. Let's imagine we're once again back in the library with the player character in his grimoire. This time there's no RFID chip and there's no blood. Instead, as the player character exits the library, suddenly the grimoire begins to emit a sorcerous screech, and this book's demonic howling attracts the attention of the security guard, triggering a combat. Now at this point, this is exactly the same situation as our first scenario, except it's not. Because part of the diegesis of the Cthulhu mythos is that unpredictable and dangerous magic exists. The player knew his character was stealing a magic grimoire. He could have had his character do some research to see if the grimoire he was stealing was somehow cursed. He might have used a spell to check its properties. A good GM could even have seeded hints to this effect, like the grimoire being titled The Howling Codex and kept stored in a padded soundproof box. But there was no possible way the player could have known to have his character search the book for RFID chips, because those don't exist in the diegesis of Cthulhu. So in order to offer player agency, we must offer a world in which the reality of the diegesis is maintained and where the player's expectations of its reality are sustained. A player cannot make rational choices in pursuit of objectives if the world is not rational. A player cannot make choices about consequences if the world is acausal. Full stop. Simulation of the diegesis is not just valuable for noetic enjoyment. It is necessary to maintain the agency, which is the essence of tabletop RPGs. Now, to be clear, The prioritization of simulation does not necessarily mean that we need to prioritize mechanical crunch. They are two separate concepts. For instance, a free Kriegspiel of the Battle of Waterloo, refereed by an experienced Prussian officer, will have almost no mechanical crunch, and yet the referee will be singularly devoted to maintaining the verisimilitude of the Kriegspiel simulation. There's no rule in free Kriegspiel that says that Napoleon can't fly across the battlefield on angel wings, but nevertheless, Napoleon will not be allowed to fly across the battlefield on angel wings because there's a game master to prevent it. Now, indeed, part of what makes tabletop RPGs special is that because they have a live game master judging the session, that GM can maintain verisimilitude and thus agency even in circumstances where the rules are iffy or vague. This is at the core of the concept of rulings, and this is something no other type of game can do. Conversely, many video games have enormous mechanical crunch, but very little verisimilitude. Think about your typical MMORPG like World of Warcraft. MMORPGs are so crunchy that people spend hours calculating damage over time for various weapons and spells. They write scripts to automate actions and more. And yet when it comes to maintaining the diegesis of the world, MMORPGs fail utterly. It is literally comedic. Like the YouTubers over at Viva La Dirt League with their epic NPC Man show have built an entire channel out of poking fun of how utterly implausible, comedic, and ridiculous MMORPG mechanics are from a point of view of verisimilitude. You've got NPCs who can watch you massacre their friends and then forget about it a few seconds later, vendors who act like they've never met you before even though you visited their shop every day, monsters with bot-like behaviors that can be exploited. It goes on and on. WoW and its kin are crunchy games, but not at all are they simulations with any verisimilitude. When old school gamers like me blasted Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition for being like an MMORPG, we didn't mean that it was like an MMORPG in being crunchy. We meant it was like an MMORPG in that its mechanical crunch didn't sustain the diegesis of the game world. It's not that there was crunch, it's that the crunch was disassociated from the diegesis. Now, this is an issue about which I am really passionate, and I probably could spend another 2 hours recounting all the ways that violations of a game's diegesis destroys player agency. But I have a Kickstarter to run, so I'm going to stop here. Next week, we'll dive into the distinction between player agency and authorial power and show how story games don't actually offer player agency. And I'll offer some musings on why even the best story games maybe haven't ever been as commercially successful as the major RPGs. Before you head out, please make a critical hit on the like and subscribe buttons and then click over to the ACKS II crowdfunding page because ACKS II puts the die in diegesis. I'll see you next week.